Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Gauranta Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. I think it's good time to Prabhu. You can start so that by the time Mangalacharan happens, others will also join, Prabhuji.
Yes, Mataji. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sindhu Mataji, for a melodious kirtan. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Mataji. We'll start off with the Mangalacharan. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swa Padantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Vita Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathamritantam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Deva Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitanscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarobhyascha Kripat Sindhu Bhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Thank you so much for joining for this evening's Srimad Bhagavatam class. We'll be speaking from the verse in the Canto 6, chapter 17, verse number 17. I'll start to share my screen. I'll recite the verse and then I'll turn it over to any of our devotees to read up the translation and purport. Please let me know if my screen is visible. Okay.
Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you, Mataji. Chitraketuruvacha Pratrigrani Namite Sapam Atmano Anjali Linambike Dever Matyaya Yatpoktam Urpadishtam Hitasya Tat. Anybody wants to read the translation? Anybody? Yes, Mataji. Please go ahead, Sindhu Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Pranam.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, Mataji. Please go ahead.
6.17.17. Only the translation, right?
Yeah, translation and purport,
Okay.
I'm just trying to see if anybody else raised their hands. Can't see anyone. So you can go ahead and read the purport, Mataji. And we'll move on.
Okay. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Chitraketu said, "My dear mother, with my own hands folded together, I accept the curse upon me. I do not mind the curse, for happiness and distress are given by the demigods as a result of one's past deeds." Shall I read one paragraph, Prabhuji, purport?
Yes, ma'am.
Since Chitraketu was a devotee of the Lord, he was not at all disturbed by the curse of Mother Parvati. He knew very well that one suffers or enjoys the results of one's past deeds as ordained by Daivanitra, superior authority, or the agents of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He knew that he had not committed any offense at the lotus feet of Lord Shiva or Goddess Parvati, yet he had been punished, and this means that the punishment had been ordained. Thus the king did not mind it. A devotee is naturally so humble and meek that he accepts any condition of life as a blessing from the Lord. Tattenu kampam shushamikshamaanaha. Bhagavatam 10.14.8. A devotee always accepts punishment from anyone as a mercy of the Lord. If one lives in this conception of life, he sees whatever reverses occurs due to his past misdeeds, and therefore he never accuses anyone. On the contrary, he becomes increasingly attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead because of his being purified by his suffering. Suffering, therefore, is also a process of purification.
So much, Mataji. I see Krishnamurti
Thank you.
Prabhu. Thank you so much, Mataji. Prabhuji, Krishnamurti Prabhu, you want to
Hare
read
Krishna,
the next?
Prabhuji.
Yes, please go ahead.
Purport by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada ki jai. Am I audible?
Yes,
Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura says in this connection that one who has developed Krishna consciousness and who exists in love with Krishna is no longer subject to suffering and happiness under the laws of karma. Indeed, he is beyond karma. The Brahma Samhita says, Karmani nidrahati kintuta bhakti bhajam. A devotee is free from the reactions of his karma because he has taken to devotional service. This same principle is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 14.26. Sa gunan samatitaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who is engaged in devotional service has already been freed from the reactions of this material karma, and thus he immediately becomes Brahma Bhuta or transcendental. This is also expressed in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.2.21. Kriyante chasya karmani. Before attaining the stage of love.
Chasya karmani. Yeah. Yes.
Kriyante chasya karmani.
Shiyante.
Shiyante chasya karmani.
Yes.
Before attaining this stage of love, one becomes free from all the results of karma. The Lord is very kind and affectionate toward his devotees, and therefore a devotee in any condition is not subjected to the results of karma. A devotee never aspires for the heavenly planets. The heavenly planets, liberation and hell are non-different for a devotee, for he does not discriminate between different positions in the material world. A devotee is always eager to return home back to Godhead and remain there as the Lord's associate. This ambition becomes increasingly fervent in his heart, and therefore he does not care about material changes in his life. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura comments that Maharaja Chitraketu's being cursed by Parvati should be considered the mercy of the Lord. The Lord wanted Chitraketu to return to Godhead as soon as possible, and therefore he terminated all the reactions of his past deeds. Acting through the heart of Parvati, the Lord, who is situated in everyone's heart, cursed Chitraketu in order to end all his material reactions. Thus, Chitraketu became Vrittasura in his next life and returned home back to Godhead. Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Thank you so much, Srimati Prabhu. So this is a very interesting shloka, not just in terms of how Chitraketu Maharaj reacted to Mother Parvati's curse, but also the very depth and meaningful purport which Srila Prabhupada has given for this verse. Very insightful. First thing, there are a lot of parallels we can draw from Bhagavatam itself in how uh, a, a, a sincere devotee of the Lord responds to such curses, right? Now, one parallel which we see is how Maharaj Parikshit reacted to Shringi's curse. So, if we go back to Canto 1, it starts off where Bhagavatam became the literature that it is, right? Where Parishit Maharaj, when he places the dead snake on Samika Rishi's neck, and Shringi, son of Samika Rishi, comes to know about this, and he curses immediately that the king will be bitten by a serpent, Takshak, and within a week, and he will soon die. Right now, Maharaj Parikshit was capable of rejecting that curse because of the prowess that he had, because of the strength that he had. But he never chose to do that. He accepted that to be will of the Lord and took it in his stride and made the first step towards, what is it in that 7 days that I need to do to go back to Godhead. Right? And that's where he met Shukadeva Goswami, and then the pages of it all unfolded in the pages of Bhagavatam Tasvar. Now, a devotee of the Lord basically is surrendered to the Lord. So he takes any pleasure or pain that comes in his way. He's absolutely equipoised in both the ways because he's surrendered to the Lord. Now, that's a very difficult stage to get to. But with constant practice, with the chanting of the holy names, serving Vaishnava, we can get there. It is hope-giving because the pages of Bhagavatam reflect the fact that these role models that we see, Chitraketu Maharaj, Parishit Maharaj, through these role models, we actually observe how they led their lives, how they reacted to certain, some of the adversaries, some of the reverses that happened in their life, and how they reacted. They not reacted, they responded to it in a very nice way, in a very nice gesture, and they took it as Lord's will and continued with their life. Now, in this first para, let's just dwell deeper with this broad overview on what's really happened there. So just to rewind a bit, Chitraketu Maharaj makes an observation around Lord Shiva holding Mother Parvati in his lap, and in fact, he's addressing some of his close devotees, and it's a setup where he's basically he's talking about Bhagavatam, right? And Chitraketu Maharaj immediately makes an observation that these two activities don't go hand in hand, and Lord Shiva can see the Vaishnava in Chitraketu Maharaj, and he doesn't say anything. Of course, Mother Parvati reacts, and she curses Chitraketu Maharaj that he would become a demon, right? Now, all this is again planned by the Lord. So if we remember, again, if we go back to Krishna's birth and his pastimes, there is a clear reflection that at one point, as Kamsa is taking his sister, Krishna's mother, into the chariot. And what happens is that there is Akashvani that comes. And Devaki basically and Vasudeva both are getting taken through the chariot. And there is a Akashvani that comes, and it tells clearly that Kamsa will be slain by the 8th child of Devaki. Now, it could have actually happened without this announcement, without this Akashvani. Things could have taken the time that it did. But through this, what Supreme Lord wanted to do was fast track the activities of Krishna's birth, the way he would give pleasure to devotees and therefore also get rid of demons in the planet. So Lord arranges these things for the next set of events to happen so that he can give to his relief to his devotees as soon as possible, right? So a devotee always is able to see the bigger plan of the Lord in all the activities that happen around him. So a devotee always accepts, as Prabhupada says, punishment from anyone as the mercy of the Lord, because he sees that even in this misery, which may appear to be a misery in the public eye, there is actually a hidden mercy of the Lord. It takes a lot of realization, maybe a lot of service and progress in devotional service to be able to see mercy of the Lord in every activity that comes to us. And finally, Lord's plan always wins, right? So if one lives, and it says, if one lives in this conceptual life, he sees whatever reverses occur to be due to his past misdeeds, and therefore he never accuses anyone. Now, basically, the fact that there is not a blame game done here, but one owns for all the activities that happens, positive or negative, and looks at both of these being mercy of the Lord. And if there is something bad that has happened to anyone, it's basically due to past misdeeds or karmas. On the contrary, he becomes increasingly attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead because of his being purified by his suffering. So a classic example is again Mother Kunti's prayers to Supreme Lord, where she prays for all these sufferings to happen again and again in her life, because that brings her to Krishna, and therefore more purification can also happen. And she gets direct darshan and basically association of the Supreme Personality of the Godhead. So slightly difficult to implement in real life, but with endeavor and with sincerity, we can at least bring this transformation in our lives. So that will be a good practical application of this. Now, in the next para, Srila Prabhupada says, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura says in this connection that one who has developed Krishna consciousness and who exists in love with Krishna is no longer subject to suffering and happiness under the laws of karma. Why? Because once one surrenders oneself to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the laws of karma strictly do not apply. So he is under the direct control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Right? Indeed, he is beyond karma. The Brahmasita says, Karmani nirdahati kintu cha bhakti bhaja. So there is a verse in Brahma Samhita in this. A devotee is freed from the reactions of the karma because he has taken to devotional service. And it goes on, and Prabhupada quotes also from Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So before attaining the stage of love, one becomes free from the results of karma. So essentially, since these are all steps towards the prema stage, right, where anartha nivriti, all those things happen, where the devotee is trying to get rid of his sins. And as he makes progress, he's under Lord's direct control. And then his life is dictated by the full control of the Lord. So, for example, Srila Prabhupada in his tenure, when he preached Krishna consciousness, there was a point in time where his business as someone who had a chemical factory and who was a proprietor of that and selling medicines and pharmacy, all those businesses took a reversal. It had to be shut down. Now, if that activity didn't happen, we wouldn't have got these nectarian purports from Srila Prabhupada, right? So Krishna orchestrated these things in Prabhupada's life, and Prabhupada, being the sincere devotee of the Lord, could understand Lord's plan, and he knew very clearly that the Lord has a bigger plan for him. And whatever Srila Prabhupada could have attained by all these karmic activities, we all agree that today we wouldn't be having this class if that hadn't happened, where Krishna forcibly shut down his business and Prabhupada turned towards spirituality, and spiritual master's instructions went to the West and started to preach. Right? So these are very classic role models that we can take in our life. The Lord, the third para, it says that Lord is very kind and affectionate towards his devotees, and therefore a devotee in any condition is not subjected to the results of karma. So typically, there are two ways to look at it. So we look at Lord as a loving father, and how a loving father will treat his child, right? Now, sometimes it could happen, as I mentioned by Prabhupada in purports to Bhagavatam, that sometimes to correct the devotee, in case of a father to his son, a loving father may sometimes put the child under the direct control of a strict tutor to make sure the child studies more sincerely, he's very attentive to his studies, and he makes progress. But it's not that the child is left perennially to the tutor's mercy. So once the child shows a change in his path, immediately the parent will alleviate. He will immediately come and say that, yes, I think my son is is taken to studies much more sincerely. So let me basically, I know I trust him and I will empower him with more affectionate exchanges. Right? So that's how it goes. So that's how Supreme Lord looks at each one of us. And therefore, he doesn't subject us to the laws of karma. As I took an example of a strict tutor, that is exchanged coming directly from the Lord, just so that we mend our ways and are in the right path. A devotee never aspires for the heavenly planets. Why? Because he's under the direct mercy of the Lord. The heavenly planets, liberation and hell, are non-different for a devotee. Why? Because he is able to, when Prahlad Maharaj was put through so many tribulations by Hiranyakashipu, crushed by elephants' feet, thrown from a mountain. In each of these positions, right, where clearly all of them are life-threatening, Prahlad Maharaj was in constant remembrance of the Lord, and Lord reciprocated by saving him in every stage of life. So a devotee is absolutely at peace, irrespective of what tribulations he's going through. A devotee always is eager to return back to Godhead. And now there's an interesting point here. While a devotee shows this intent, and if he's sincere and he's developed a deep bonding with the Lord by all his devotional services, Lord definitely reciprocates by fast-tracking that aspect. And we talked about it happened in Srila Prabhupada's life. It happened in the life of devotees when Kamsa was exit was fast-tracked by the Akashvani. We also saw examples of in Parishit Maharaj's life, in Chitraketu Maharaj's life. All these places we see how Lord has fast-tracked that. And Maharaj Chitraketu being cursed by Parvati should be considered the mercy of the Lord. And we saw that. Why? Because everything is getting fast-tracked. Otherwise, it would have taken some n number of lifetimes before this exit of, before Chitraketu Maharaj actually directly gets the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord in the spiritual kingdom, right? So to be able to fast-track that, okay, let's put a catalyst. So many of us will remember in a chemical reaction, there is a catalyst which is given as part of the reaction. Now that catalyst speeds up the reaction, but the catalyst doesn't burn out in the whole process. So Lord brings catalysts in our life to speed up certain activities which would have taken a longer time to happen in our lives. So acting through the heart of Parvati, the Lord, who is situated in everyone's heart, cursed Chitraketu in order to end all his material reactions. So even in a curse, we see Lord's mercy, right? And that's all for the overall goodness of the devotee. And thus Chitraketu Maharaj became Vritrasura in his next life and returned home back to God. And we'll see how it unfolds in the next subsequent chapters. Okay. Any questions? We'll keep going otherwise. Okay. Samsara chakra etasmin jantur ajnana mohitah brahmayan sukham cha dukkham cha pumte sarvatra sarvada. Anybody wants to read the translation and purport? Yes, Mataji, I'm unable to see who it is. Yes, Divya Mataji, thank you.
Translation by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Deluded by ignorance, the living entity wanders in the forest of this material world, enjoying the happiness and distress resulting from his past deeds everywhere and at all times. Therefore, my dear mother, neither you nor I am to be blamed for this incident. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranams.
Yes, Mother, thank you. Anybody wants to read the purport? Small one.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Yes, Mother, thank you. Yes, Mother, go ahead,
Purport
please.
by Srila Prabhupada, Jai Srila Prabhupada, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 3.27. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudatma kartaha iti manyate. The bewildered soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by nature. Actually, a conditioned soul is completely under the control of material nature, wandering here and there, always and everywhere. He is subjected to the results of his past deeds. This is carried out by the laws of nature. But one foolishly thinks himself the doer, which in fact he is not. To get free from the karma chakra, the wheel of the results of one's karma, one should take to bhakti marga, devotional service or Krishna consciousness. That is the only remedy. Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam raja. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you so much, Mataji. So, Chitraketu Maharaj is elaborating further that, in material world, we are all under the three modes of material nature, right? And that's what is the essence of this verse. And the living entity thinks himself to be the doer of activities, where in actuality it is carried out by nature. And a conditioned soul is completely under the control of material nature. Now, why so? Because the material nature has been created in such a way that it's very interesting that when a person comes to the material world, he thinks that he will have the influence and he'll be able to wield control. But unfortunately, he's under the control of material nature. And therefore, he wanders here and there, always and everywhere. He's subject to the results of his past deeds under karma. And he foolishly thinks that himself to be when he is not. Now, here there is a mention of how we can break the karma chakra by taking to devotional service. Now, the aspect here which we can take away and look to apply in our day-to-day lives is a couple of things. First is, which coming back from the previous verse, anything good happens, we are more than happy to receive it. But I think the challenge is remaining equipoised, both in good and in the bad scenarios. So in both cases, if we are able to see the mercy of the Lord, that helps. Second is, if we also come to understanding that we are under the influence of the material nature, and that we have a very little influence in terms of what we can do to alter our situations. I think it is so comforting to be able to have that realization. The third is that to break the cycle of birth and death, which is one of the key attributes of material nature, is to actually take to devotional service. So, Lord has given us a very clear-cut path to exit from this material nature, this worldly life that we lead, and where we get a very small drops of honey like happiness, which is very flittering and temporary. Right? So, yeah, so that's the bit to be taken away from here. And here, Chitraketu Maharaj nicely says, "My dear mother, neither you or I are to be blamed for this incident." Now, how easy it is for anybody who's just got cursed to respond to the person who has just cursed, saying, "My dear mother." Now that talks volumes of control, sense control, mind control that Chitraketu Maharaj is exhibiting here in this stanza. basically, if anybody today, if you walk to the road and His Grace Amarendra Prabhu talks about this example, that our tolerance gets tested in the very first turn that we take. Somebody cuts the road and gets ahead of us, immediately we are enraged. Road rage is very common. Now, if someone has even a semblance of criticism for us, we'll blow the top, right? So our reactions to certain reversals are so fluttering, so whimsical. We react. We are at the drop of the hat. Anger comes. So when we look at these stories, when I say story, what I mean is the real life incidents, but I call it story because there is a lot of inspiration we can draw from them. When we look at Chitraketu Maharaj's life, when we look at Prahlad Maharaj, when we look at Parishit Maharaj's life, we get this inspiration that, Lord has empowered these devotees with so much of tolerance to be able to bear with troubled times. May that Lord bestow the same kind of virtues. So these devotees are giving us a way to pray in the right way to the Supreme Lord, right? Not ask for the big gifts, which are fleeting and temporary, like a bigger house. So when we ask for some virtues in our character, that will build confidence and it will build a lot of strength in our devotional service, and which is where we want to be. So that's some of the takeaways coming from these couple of verses. Let's go to the next one. Naivatmana paraschapi kartasya sukha dukhayo kartaram manyate trajna atmanam param evacha. Anybody?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Yes, Mataji, please go ahead.
Thank Dandat Pranam. Translation by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada ki jai. In this material world, neither the living entity nor others, friends and enemies, are the cause of material happiness and distress. But because of gross ignorance, the living entity thinks that he and others are the cause. Purport also, should I read, Prabhuji?
Yes, Mataji, it's a small
Purport,
one. Yes.
Purport, yeah. In this verse, the word ajna is very significant. In the material world, all living entities are ajna, ignorant, in different degrees. This ignorance continues very strongly in the mode of ignorance presented by material nature. One must therefore promote himself to the stage of goodness through his character and behavior, and then gradually come to the transcendental platform or adokshaja platform, in which he realizes both his position and the position of others. Everything is done under the superintendence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The process by which the results of action are ordained is called Niyatam, always working. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Mataji. So here are some technical terms like agya, which is ignorance, and adoksaja, right? Where it's a transcendental platform where he is able to realize his position and the position of others. Now, the important thing to note here is that living entities under the constant control of the three modes of material nature, right? Goodness, passion, and ignorance. And while he thinks he's the doer, therefore he thinks he's the cause, which he is not. And also that how does one get away, or how does one remove this? How does one come out of ignorance? The first step is to get into the mode of goodness, right? Now, to make it more elaborate, there are many times when we basically might have reacted in a particular way in a situation, right? For example, it could be talking back or seriously harming with our words, anybody, reacting very, very sharply and negatively to a criticism, which could have been dealt with in a very nice way. And then later, after sufficient time has gone by, then thinking about it and reminiscing the fact that I think I was harsh on that person, or maybe I shouldn't have reacted in that way. That repentance that comes, right? That's mode of goodness. And what anybody might have said during in the fit of anger, is either ignorance or passion, right? So so in the mode of goodness, the mind is actually tuned to think in a more pragmatic way, in a more in a way which is actually more long enduring, long standing, which is the right attitude or right mood to carry. So to break that ignorance. So when I talked about reflecting on mistakes and taking a positive step forward, that is mode of goodness. So you get that stage only in a mode of goodness where you can reflect and improve from certain behaviors or certain activities that may have happened in the past. So so then that is one step. The second is everything is done under supervision of the Lord. So again, as part of that, when one is in a mode of goodness, he definitely sees that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is behind everything, right? And that gives him a lot of solace. And then, therefore, the process by which the results are ordained because Supreme Lord is behind each of it. So that's the bit which is talked about here. Let's move to the next one. Guna Pravaha.
Hare Krishna,
Yes.
Prabhuji.
Yes, ma'am.
One
Please go ahead.
small clarification at your end, particular
Yes.
that case, Mataji, Prabhuji.
Uh,
Of course, we ourselves thinking that we were in goodness and we were in right path. We were not harming anybody and anything else. We were not interfering in any facts. Even though sometimes we will be put in trouble by hearing words, by new behaviors, and all those things. So by that time, it is not an easy thing to take as it is. Definitely, we will respond it.
correct.
So how to overcome all these things? How it is to be implemented in our lives? That is
Very
my
nice.
Of course, I do agree. Last three verses were very, very nearest to our day-to-day livelihoods. Please enlighten me, please, Prabhuji.
No, Prabhuji, it's a fantastic question on how to apply this in our lives. Now, there are a few quotations I'll try to remember from some of the senior devotees, right? Like His Grace Gaur Gopal Das, Gaur Gopal Prabhu, and others. Right? Now, the fact remains that first of all, let's examine the fact that going back to your question, what you mentioned is that the devotee or the person has never done any harm to anybody. And still, there are enough people in the society who will trigger him, right? That's your question, right? I personally have not harmed anybody. But why am I getting this reaction, right? Now, a couple of ways to look at it is that's one way to look at it is that's Lord's way to test each one of us. Like, myself, or anybody, we might have studied so many books and got a lot of theoretical knowledge, a lot of, information. Now, that is Gyan, but applying that is Vigyan, right? How do I apply it? Now, how do we apply such concepts that are learned? Only when somebody's put through a test. And Lord puts us into those tests so that the Gyan becomes Vigyan, wherein whatever we have learned is applied practically. Therefore, those concepts become more reinforced. Otherwise, they will go away. That is one. Second is the fact that I still have some way to go in terms of my purification. So this is happening. These activities, these events are happening for my purification so that my karmas can be cut and I can actually approach, I'm in my path to devotional service. And Prabhupada says that, the basic litmus test for a devotee is how he deals with provoking situations, right? When things are very hunky-dory around us, everything is going right around us, everybody becomes a gentleman, right? No problem with that. When things are not right, when people are criticizing, how does the person react? That's the true litmus test, right? And Lord wants to ensure that we clear the test with flying colors, right? And then we prove that, yes, we have not forgotten, I have not forgotten you. I know that you are behind it. And just being that much charged up in terms of devotional service. So that is another way to look at it. Now, there is fourth way of looking at it, which His Grace Gaur Gopal Prabhu talks about in many situations. So let's say there is a very close friend, a close aid, who has caused us grief, and that is very true. Mostly, biggest grief is given by people who are closest to us. I mean, that's a realization I'm sure many of us in this conversation have gone through. Now, the way Gaur Gopal Prabhu looks at this is that if I look at an accounting ledger, right, there are many credits this person has given to my account, right? But there was one small debit that happened. So that doesn't mean that the overall account balance is now fully negative. No, right? There's a small debit that has happened, but still the account ledger still shows a big credit. So when one looks at it from that perspective, that there is a sense of gratitude for that person, for the past deeds that he has given. Maybe that person has helped you at your most difficult time.
Maybe the net issue, please bear with us. Hare Krishna. So are we reading the shloka?
Mataji, slokas were reciting by Prabhuji only. We were reading translation purports.
Okay. Maybe a net issue, let me see. Hare Krishna. Which shloka we are done?
Okay.
Hare Krishna.
19th, Mataji. 19th.
19th?
Up to 19th.
19th is done, completed?
Yes, Mataji. Yes, Mataji.
Okay, so 20th. Huh? Okay. I guess the explanation is also done.
Process were going on, Mataji.
Okay.
Actually, Krishnamurti Prabhuji was asking one question. He was answering that, Mataji.
Okay. No issues. So we will try to do the 20th shloka reading. Who wants to take part in reading? By the time Prabhu comes, we can just read that.
Shall I, Mataji? Shall I read, Mataji?
Yeah, please read, Mataji.
Guna pravaha etasmin kah sapako no anugraha kah swargo narakah kotva kum sukham dukham eva. Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Thank you. May I request somebody to read the translation?
Sorry, Mataji, I had an internet problem.
I guess that, Prabhu. That's why I told them to just at least read.
Yeah, there was a power breakdown here. I've connected through my mobile temporarily. Hope my screen, I think somebody's already sharing the screen, which is fine.
Yeah, Prabhuji, I was sharing the screen.
Okay. Do you want me to share the screen, Mataji?
Are you able to?
I can. One moment, just give me.
Okay, Prabhu, go ahead.
So I think Prabhuji, did your question get answered? So I'm not sure where I last left. I was talking about account credit and debit, right? So
Yes, Prabhuji.
so does it help, Prabhu, in terms of I know
Yeah,
still I'm
I tell say 100%. And
yeah,
then your clarification was also there at your end regarding the uh, test by Supreme Lord. So to what
correct,
extent devotee is tolerating all these things, that will be
correct,
that will also be happens in that case also.
correct,
So we
correct,
were I myself thinking of that we have to move to that position to get solve the problems like this. We have to
correct,
keep quiet, and then we
correct,
have to watch the uh, that
correct,
environment by that time. Is
correct.
it not
And
the situation?
yeah,
If you want this,
so one thing I've seen, Prabhu, to just answer that point more holistically. So what happens is it's okay to have respectful disagreements, right? Where you're
yes,
respectfully disagreeing, or but where it really goes sour is when certain words are chosen to represent that feeling, right? And those words can be very rash, brash, very argumentative. That actually causes the biggest problem, right?
damages.
Words damages. So it is, if some criticism comes, it's okay to respectfully disagree,
Yes.
right? And I think that's where that education, that learning has to happen, but
Yeah,
not
yes.
let the mind dictate those choice of words, but your intelligence is dictating those choice of words,
Okay.
right? So those are the parts.
Okay.
Okay, Prabhu.
Thank you.
So
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you.
no issues, Prabhu, not
Hare
at all.
Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Sorry. So where were we in 20, right? I'll try to rush through this. Guna pravaha etasmin kaha safa ko anugraha kaha swargo naraka ko ava kim sukham dukkham eva. Anybody wants to read the translation? Haribol.
May I, Prabhu, with your permission?
Yes, Mother. Please go ahead.
Translation by Srila Prabhupada, Jai Srila Prabhupada. This material world resembles the waves of a constantly flowing river. Therefore, what is a curse and what is a favor? What are the heavenly planets and what are the hellish planets? What is actually happiness and what is actually distress? Because the waves flow constantly, none of them has an eternal effect. Hare Krishna. So somebody can take for
Yes,
reading purport.
Yes,
May
absolutely.
may
Yes, Prabhu. Please go ahead. Yes. No.
Srila Bhakti Vedanta purport by A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Bhakti Vedanta Thakura sings Miche Mayara Vase Yacha Veshe Kwacha Prabhuji, I can't pronounce it.
That's okay. Khacha
Habudabu Bhai.
Hadubudu Bhai. Yeah. It's a Bengali. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, my dear living entities, within this material world, why are you being carried away by the waves of the modes of material nature? Jiva, Krishna Dasa, ye Viswasa Kareleta Aru Dukka Nahi. If the living entity tries to understand that he is an eternal servant of Krishna, there will no longer be misery for him. Krishna wants us to give up all other engagements and surrender unto him. If you do so, where will the cause and effect of this material world be? There is nothing like cause and effect for the surrendered soul. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura says in this regard that being put into the material world is like being thrown into a mine of salt. If one falls into a mine of salt, he tastes only salt wherever he goes. Similarly, this material world is full of miseries. The so-called temporary happiness of the world is also misery. But in ignorance, we cannot understand this. That is the actual position. When one comes to his senses, when he becomes Krishna conscious, he is no longer concerned with the various conditions of this material world. He is not concerned with happiness or distress, curses or favors, or heavenly or healthy planets. He seems It seems is no distinction between them. This is the final answer. Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Very nicely put together here. The material world resembles the waves of a constantly flowing river. Now, why so? Because material world, this distresses, this happiness, they keep taking turns to come, right? And what is also mentioned is that the question around what is actually happiness and what is actually distress. Now, what can appear to be distress can give happiness very soon, right? Let's take an example here. Now, say for example, somebody is going through health distress, right? Let's say there's a pain in the shoulder and some symptoms like that. He goes to the doctor, and the doctor tells him that this was actually the first stage of cancer, and it's very lucky for this person to have come and met the doctor in the first symptom itself, and therefore he can be treated. And yeah. So while there is a fear of oh, I'm in a first stage of cancer, but there is also a slight relief in that, saying that it's treatable, and he can very soon be on the recovery path. And Lord is so merciful that this first stage of cancer was very quickly notified and it wasn't allowed to progress. Right? So a distress suddenly became happiness. And a happiness can also become a distress. Like, for example, many times I've seen people taking very expensive gadgets or expensive car. Let's say somebody's taken a Mercedes car, just as an example, and he drives through the road. No, happiness is there in buying the car, but there's a lot of fear driving that vehicle because somebody will scratch. And when you leave it alone, somebody's always worried that somebody may steal the car. So that happiness has actually becomes distress day in and day out. So it leads to the point that what is really happiness, what is really distress, and therefore seeing the mercy of the Lord in both is the safest bet. Right? That way we are well covered. And here there's a very nice mention that which is towards the end, that material world is like full pile of salt, and one will only taste salt. So when one takes to devotional service, it's like there is torrential rain, and somebody has an umbrella, and he's protecting himself from this torrential rain. So devotional service is that umbrella which is protecting you from that torrential rain and keeping you dry. Right? So we cannot change the world around us, but we can change ourselves, and that's the emphasis laid out here. Okay, so let's keep moving. The next one. Okay. Ekah srajati bhutani bhagavan atmamaya esham bandam cha moksham cha sukham dukkham cha nishkalaha. Anybody wants to read? Translation. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, shall I read the book?
Yes, Mataji, sir.
Translation by Srila Prabhupada, Jai Shri Prabhupada. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is one. Unaffected by the conditions of the material world, he creates all the conditioned souls by his own personal potency. Because of being contaminated by material energy, the living entity is put into ignorance and thus into different conditions of bondage. Sometimes by knowledge, the living entity is given liberation. In Sattva Guna and Rajo Guna, he is subjected to happiness and distress. Purport, shall I read, Prabhu?
Yes, Mataji, please go ahead.
Purport by Srila Prabhupada, Jai Shri Prabhupada. The question may be raised, why the living entities are situated in different conditions and who has arranged this? The answer is that it has been done by the Supreme Personality of Godhead without anyone's help. The Lord has his own energies. Parasya Shaktir Vividaiva Shruyate. And one of them, namely the external energy, creates the material world and the varieties of happiness and distress for the conditioned souls under the supervision of the Lord. The material world consists of three modes of material nature: Sattva Guna, Rajo Guna, and Tamo Guna. By Sattva Guna, the Lord maintains the material world. By Rajo Guna, he creates it, and by Tamo Guna, he annihilates it. After the varieties of living entities are created, they are subject to happiness and distress according to their association. When they are in Sattva Guna, the mode of goodness, they feel happiness. When in Rajo Guna, they are distressed. And when in Tamo Guna, they have no sense of what to do or what is right and wrong. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you so much, Mataji. So here, it's very interesting connection Srila Prabhupada talks about between the creation, maintenance, and annihilation, and the gunas associated with that, and how these gunas torment, except for Sattva Guna, the living entity, and tricks him sometimes and makes him do certain activities. So we see that these gunas are needed for the material nature to be operational, because without these gunas, the activity of creation cannot happen, right? So, as an example, just to draw a parallel with, the real world in the sense the material world. Let's say somebody wants to have a breakthrough innovation. I'm just taking Edison as an example. There are some, stories. There are some blogs that are written saying that he failed 1,000 times, right? So the ability to keep trying, irrespective of outcome, is basically Rajoguna. Like, I'm passionate that I need this outcome to happen, right? So therefore, anything that needs to be created needs that mode of passion that fuels that person or individual. Right? And when somebody has to annihilate, you have to be actually, you have to be in Tamaguna, because Tamaguna is more suitable for that activity. And if you have to maintain, you have to be always in Sattva-guna, because you have to take a balanced view. You cannot take view in extremes. So to keep things running, there is pluses and there is minus, and you have to have all the balances tied up, right? Everything has to match up. So these natures which are responsible for running the material world also torment us. They come with byproducts. So when the living entity is in part of this world, he's tormented because they're prevalent in the material nature. So he gets tossed around by the material nature, by these three modes, right? So that's one takeaway. And yes, and there's a mention here. The answer is that it has been done by the Supreme Personality of Godhead without anyone's help. So the very first shloka, Janmadhyasya Itaratas Chateshva Abhigyas Swarat. So Swarat means independent. We are all dependent. Supreme Lord is independent, right? He's not bound by anybody, but we are always bound. What to talk of, we are bound by these modes of material nature. Many cases, we are bound by our own limitations in terms of what we can do bodily, right? So that's a very important call out here, that Supreme Lord is self-sufficient. He doesn't need sanction from anybody else, because he's the last authority in that, right? So yes. So let's keep going, just in the interest of time. Natasya kaschit daita pratipo nagyati bandhu na paro na cha swa samasya sarvatra nirjannasya sukhena raga kuta eva rosaha. Anybody else?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes, Mataji, please go ahead.
Translation by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is equally disposed toward all living entities. Thereafter, no one is very dear to him, and no one is a great enemy for him. No one is his friend, and no one is his relative. Being unattached to the material world, he has no affection for so-called happiness or hatred for so-called distress. The two terms happiness and distress are relative. Since the Lord is always happy, for him there is no question of distress. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji. So Lord has three, his body is composed of three things. Satchidananda Vigraha. So Sat is basically, so Chit is full of consciousness, and essentially Satchit Anand, the last part, that is bliss, happiness, right? So he's always happy because that's part of his composition. I mean, there's no composition like that's him. Happiness is one of the key aspects of the Lord. Right? So therefore, there's no relative, there is no, because when you're always going to be happy, you don't have personal biases towards anyone. And I'll have a quick question towards the end, if we find time, just on this shloka. Please hold on to the thought, and I'll ask it once we're done with the verses. Tatapi tat chakti visarga esham sukhaya dukhaya hitaya bandaya mokshaya cha mrityu janmano saririnam samsrite vakalpate. Avakalpate. Yes, anybody? That's really good. Anyone wants to?
I will read my. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Anybody who has not read can take it up, but otherwise.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Yes, Madhu.
Translation by Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada ki jai. Although the Supreme Lord is unattached to our happiness and success according to karma, and although no one is his enemy or favorite, he creates pious and impious activities through the agency of his material potential. Thus, for the continuation of the materialistic way of life, he creates happiness and distress, good fortune and bad, bondage and liberation, birth and death. Perfect by Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada ki jai. Although the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the ultimate doer of everything, in its original transcendental existence, he is not responsible for the happiness and distress or bondage and liberation of the conditioned souls. These are due to the results of the creative activities of the living entities within this material world. By the order of a judge, one person is released from jail and another is imprisoned, but the judge is not responsible for the distress and happiness of these different people is due to their own activities. Although the government is ultimately the supreme authority, the just
Lost the Mata. Lost Mataji there.
government.
Yes, go ahead, Mataji. I think we lost you. You may...
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Yes. Please go ahead, Mataji.
Administered by the department of the government, and the government is not responsible for the individual judgments. Therefore, the government is equal to all the citizens. Similarly, the Supreme Lord is neutral to everyone. But for the maintenance of law and order, his supreme government has various departments which control the activities of the living entities. Another example given in this regard is that lilies open or close because of the sunshine, and thus the bumblebees enjoy or suffer, but the sunshine and the sun globe are not responsible for the happiness and distress of the bumblebees. Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Thank you so much, Mataji. Yes, there is a lot of content in this. Can anyone tell me, and it's not a trick question, just trying to understand why Prabhupada has talked about so many examples here about a judge, about government, about lily, and about
Yes.
yes, Mataji, please. What's the
Yeah,
point
basically,
Prabhupada is writing?
the Lord is not the ultimate. I mean, though Lord is the cause of all causes, He is the ultimate doer. Yet he's not responsible for our mistakes or our happiness or our distress. For that only, he's telling like the example of the judge and the other lily, sunshine.
Correct. So he's not responsible for our deeds. Absolutely spot
Yeah.
on. Also, what is the other aspect which Srila Prabhupada is communicating here?
He's aloof.
He's aloof, absolutely. And what else? Yes, so the another important point which Prabhupada is driving home here is that the Supreme Lord is neutral to everyone, right? The aspect that neutrality is very important, that he's equally poised or he's equally disposed to everyone, right? And the happiness and distress is through the karma which the living entity is going through. I'll ask it just after this. Any questions so far? I just wanted to get a semblance before we move to the next one. Yes, Mataji.
Prabhu, same as Krishnamurti Prabhu asked, though we know this knowledge, it's so difficult to apply in life, Prabhu. So what to do, like
I
how
think,
long it will take? Like that.
Definitely. So Lord answers this question when Arjuna asks for, how to get mind control. Mind is such a dynamic entity, right? It can make or break a person. It can be the best of friend or worst of enemy, right? So how do we take care of our mind? And Lord says that, I agree with you, Arjuna, that mind is very hard to control. But with practice, it is possible. And we've seen so many examples. These role models that we see right from Parishit Maharaj to Chitraketu Maharaj to many devotees, right? They exhibit the characteristic of mind control. Now, when Mother Parvati cursed Chitraketu Maharaj, now Chitraketu Maharaj could have also talked back, could have also counter cursed, could have also taken retaliatory action, but he chose not to do that. Right? Now, the question here is, how do we develop that kind of a maturity? It's a very interesting and important question. A couple of things. One is the fact that let's assume that we are put through a test, right? We've learned this concept. We just put through a test maybe tomorrow itself or tonight itself. And we fail the test. That's absolutely fine. It's absolutely expected that any concept that we learned, very difficult to apply, and therefore we'll fail. But after a day, if we are able to realize the mistake we made, that I could have reacted a bit differently, that itself is a course correction which is already set in motion, right? If that repentance is also not there, that means we have not learned anything and we want to behave the way we want to, right? So, but if that awareness is happening, if that small kind of a semblance of anguish is there, that I could have done a little differently. Maybe I could have reacted a bit differently. Maybe I could have spoken a bit differently. That means the medicine of these scriptures is already started to work. Right? So that's how we can see. The first stage is that. But after that, when that repentance grows in us, that we could have done a bit differently, it will become a pre-action. That means, okay, if I behave, the moment something is thrown at us, now we'll think twice before answering, right? Will this blow up the situation worse? Will it make it worse or will it get better? Will my response take me towards Krishna or away from Krishna? So once we start to evaluate from that perspective, I know it's not easy. I'm definitely not disagreeing that it is going to be a bit of a journey. But if we are able to start with some baby steps, that first is repentance after the event, and then slightly bringing it in ahead of the curve, that we start to apply those learnings, that to the extent saying that, somebody's criticizing me, let me at least be respectful in terms of how I want to respond back. Now that is second step, right? Third step is that choice of words. Fourth step may be that, I kind of speak my heart out in terms of, why our positions are like that. And we are able to, the other person is able to empathize with me. So there are ways to progress in this particular way. But it all starts with Gyan and then applying it. That is Vigyan. So does it help, Mataji?
Yes, Prabhu, it helps.
That it's on 4.
Help, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Yes. We go to the next one. Oh, I think we were supposed. Did we discuss this previous one?
23
No,
we finished.
we did. Okay. Ata prasadayena tvam sapa mokshaya bhamini yan manyase hi asaduktam mamatat shamyatam sati.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, may I read?
Yes, Mataji, please go ahead.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Oh mother, you are now unnecessarily angry. But since all my happiness and distress are destined by my past activities, I do not plead to be excused or relieved from your curse. Although what I have said is not wrong, please let whatever you think is wrong to be pardoned. Purport by Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Being fully aware of how the results of one's karma occur by the laws of nature, Chitraketu did not want to be released from Parvati's curse. Nonetheless, he wanted to satisfy her because although his verdict was natural, she was displeased with him. As a matter of course, Maharaja Chitraketu begged pardon from Parvati. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dhanvatranam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mataji. So I think some of the questions devotees have been having. Now, if you look at this exchange between Mother Parvati and Chitraketu Maharaj, where Mother Parvati cursed him, but look at the choice of words Chitraketu Maharaj had in addressing Mother Parvati, expressing, Mother, hope you're not displeased. So when I can understand that, it's very difficult to copy, clone, replicate such advanced devotees. But what can happen is we can draw inspiration. Right? We can, if there is a very provoking situation, I think with a little bit of Vigyan, applying it, in a smaller scale, and then trying to see, how we have learned from it, it will become very imperative that there are times when, we will take retaliatory actions more in terms of these three things. First of all, is silence the best answer? Is clarifying my stand with respectful words the best answer? Is dissuading the other person or trying to divert the other person into other topic the best answer? Or, the list of options. So basically, Lord, when we place our trust in the Lord, He actually starts to give us maturity in these areas, that He will guide us by saying that, I think, and through Paramatma, He'll guide that, I think it's better you don't say anything right now, right? Or in some cases, things just, those provoking situations, you allow it time, it automatically disappears. In some cases, clarifying helps, right? Very respectfully, very, very having the right choice of words. In some cases, it could happen so in such a way that ignoring is also the best option. So Lord will empower each and every one of us with that intelligence to deal with that situation, right? As long as we completely surrender to Him, as long as we surrender our mind, body, and intelligence to Him, He will direct our intelligence in the right way for the right scenarios, right? But that faith and trust has to be unshaken on it. So that also is another element we can take away from this, right? And Chitraketu Maharaj, being a very dear devotee of the Lord, knew exactly how to respond in every situation, right? And so is Parashit Maharaj, so is other sincere Vaishnavas that we've seen so far in Bhagavatam. Any further questions before we end the call today?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, you
Yes,
said
ma'am.
you surrender your body, mind and intelligence to the Lord. So how do we do that, Prabhu?
Nice question, Mataji. So essentially, we purify our body by seva, right? Serving Vaishnavas, like preparing prasadam, respectfully bringing them home, taking up menial services, that is by body. Then basically the intelligence is to a lot of extent purified by essentially reading scriptures, right? So when we read scriptures such as Bhagavatam, it starts to purify our mind. It plays on our mind. We learned so much, right? In these 7 verses that we went through together, we learned so many things about how to essentially deal with interpersonal exchanges, how to be respectful even in adversity, all those things. So those are the things which are purifying our intelligence by reading Shastra. Now, how do we purify our mind? By essentially shlokas. So mantra, right? Mana trayati iti mantra. So to purify our mind, what do? We chant the holy names of the Lord. We pray very sincerely while we chant. We ask for more services. So these are the ways, Mataji, we can purify our mind, body, and intelligence. Does that help?
Yes, Prabhu. Yes.